The sun had barely begun its climb over the jagged horizon when Clara's scream cut through the still desert air, a piercing sound that rattled the few crows roosting atop the skeletal trees. Her chest heaved, lungs burning as she struggled. Against the coarse rope that bound her wrists, the fibers biting into her skin with every desperate tug. At 30, Clara had survived more than most would in a lifetime, but nothing in her past had prepared her for this, being captured by a cowboy, known across the county for his merciless temper and ruthless dealings. Dust swirled around her boots, and the metallic tang of blood her own scraped from the dry soil when she fell mingled with the acrid scent of sweat. The cowboy stood nearby, his silhouette dark and imposing, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his sharp features. His spurs clinked softly against the wooden porch of a half-collapsed shack, a slow, menacing rhythm that seemed to echo in the silence of the canyon. He circled her like a predator sizing up prey, a crooked grin tugging at the corner of his sunburned lips. "You're lucky I don't put you out with the horses," he said, voice low and deliberate, each word meant to grind fear into her bones. Clara's stomach turned, and she swallowed hard, tasting the grit of the desert in her mouth. Her hands burned from the ropes, wrists chafed raw, and yet, even in the face of terror, she refused to cry. Tears would be a luxury she could not. A forward dot from the ridge above, a shadow shifted. Muscles tensed beneath bronzed skin, long black hair streaming behind him like a dark banner. He moved silently, almost part of the desert itself, eyes locked on Clara with an intensity that made her pulse spike. The warrior had watched her from the moment the cowboy dragged her from her home, hidden among the canyon rocks and jagged boulders. Every step, every grunt of exertion, every threat whispered into the hot morning air had been noted. He didn't know her name yet, didn't need to. He only knew that she was in mortal danger and that he would not let her die here. Clara's heart thudded violently against her ribs as the cowboy grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet with a force that made her knees buckle. The rope scratched her skin, and she winced, the sting burning sharply. "Come on, girl," he snarled. "You owe, and now you pay. Ain't no one gonna save you out here." His grip was iron, unyielding, but Clara's eyes flicked to the ridge. A flicker of hope surged in her chest, raw and desperate. That shadowed figure, the warrior, was closer now, moving with the precision of a hunter who had claimed this land as his own. The cowboy's horse pawed at the dirt, impatient, nostrils flaring as it sensed the tension in the air. Clara stumbled forward, her sandaled feet scraping against rocks and grit, leaving faint prints in the red dust. She felt the heat of the sun press down, relentless and unforgiving, each ray a reminder of how exposed and vulnerable she truly was. And yet, in the distance, the warrior crept ever closer, body low, mouth ready, every muscle coiled like a spring, prepared to strike. Clara swallowed hard, grit filling her throat, and forced herself to meet the cowboy's eyes. Fear clawed at her, but beneath it, defiance burned, a spark that refused to be snuffed. She would not be an easy target, even if her body trembled with exhaustion. Every step she took was a prayer, every breath a vow to survive. The cowboy's grin faltered slightly, as if sensing that someone was coming for her, someone who would not allow him his prize. Suddenly, a sharp whistle split the air, startling both Clara and the cowboy. The wind seemed to shift in that instant, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and earth, a reminder that the land itself had its guardians. The warrior emerged from the rocks like a phantom, chest bare, bronzed skin gleaming with sweat. Long black hair tangled and wild, adorned with tribal jewelry that shimmered in the sunlight. His eyes met the cowboy's with unyielding fire, and in that frozen moment, the desert fell silent, holding its breath as destiny prepared to intervene. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who this man was, yet instinct told her he was her only hope. Her struggle paused, if only for a heartbeat, as she realized that for the first time since being taken, she was not alone and that her life might not end here in the dust and heat of a merciless desert after all. The cowboy's horse snorted and stamped the dry, cracked ground, anxious under the weight of the early morning sun. Clara's wrists burned, the ropes biting into her skin as she stumbled forward, heels scraping the red dust. Every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion, every heartbeat a hammer against her ribs. The desert stretched endlessly around her, jagged cliffs rising like jagged teeth against the pale sky, dust devils swirling across the horizon, and the acrid smell of sweat and dirt thick in the air. Behind her, the cowboy's harsh laughter echoed across the canyon, a low, cruel sound that made her stomach twist in fear. "Move faster, girl. Ain't got all day," he barked. His spurs jangled like warning bells with each step, a rhythm of impending doom. Clara's chest heaved, tears pricking her eyes as her mind raced, searching for any chance of escape. She knew her life depended on speed, on cunning, on someone or something coming to her aid, and someone was coming. From the ridge above, the warrior moved with a predatory grace, blending into the desert like smoke in the wind. His muscles rippled beneath bronzed skin, taut as a coiled bowstring, long black hair whipping in the breeze, tribal jewelry clinking softly with each movement. His eyes were locked on Clara, dark pools of unyielding determination. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every step was a calculated promise. She would not fall today, not while he breathed. Clara's gaze flicked to the ridge, a flicker of hope igniting deep within her chest. Her voice was caught in her throat, but her feet moved on their own, driven by the desperate need to survive. She could feel the sting of dust in her throat, the sun scorching her neck, sweat running down her back. The ropes cut into her skin with every frantic tug, and yet she didn't slow. Somewhere ahead, freedom or death awaited. The cowboy glanced up, sensing movement on the ridge. His eyes narrowed, and he spat into the dirt, muttering a curse under his breath. "You think someone's coming to save her? Ha! Ain't no one out here in this wasteland." But even as he spoke, the warrior's shadow stretched longer across the canyon floor, silent and inevitable, like a force of nature itself. Clara stumbled on a jagged rock, and the cowboy's hand shot out to grab her, yanking her upright with brutal force. Pain shot through her shoulder, a sharp, searing reminder of her helplessness. "You're mine," he hissed, his breath hot and reeking of tobacco. But just as despair threatened to take hold, a sudden whistle cut through the canyon, high and piercing like the cry of an eagle. The warrior's leap was almost superhuman. He descended from the ridge, boots barely touching the ground, bow in hand, arrows nocked and ready. Dust erupted around him in a small cinematic cloud, each grain glinting in the sunlight like tiny sparks. Clara's heart stuttered. For the first time since being captured, she felt the weight of hope pressing against her chest. The cowboy stopped mid-step, eyes widening as the warrior landed before him. Chest bare, muscles taut, long black hair flowing in the desert wind. Adorned with turquoise, bone, and silver tribal jewelry that shimmered with movement. The warrior looked less like a man and more like a force of nature. He raised his bow, silent and precise, aiming directly at the cowboy's chest. Every line of his body screamed lethal skill, every breath measured and controlled. Clara stumbled backward, her feet scraping against the dust, watching as the warrior's presence alone seemed to bend the air around them. The cowboy's confidence faltered, a flash of fear crossing his sun-leathered face. He was a predator used to dominance, but here, in the unforgiving expanse of the desert, he had met something more primal, more relentless than himself. The warrior's eyes never left the cowboy. Clara realized then, with an almost terrifying clarity, that this man would not hesitate. He would fight, and he would protect her, even if it cost him everything. The desert itself seemed to hush, wind stilling, dust suspended in a tense pause. As if the land recognized the imminent collision of these two wills, Clara's pulse quickened. She was still bound, still vulnerable, but now she could almost taste freedom. She could almost feel the warrior's strength beside her, a shield against the cruel cowboy who had dared to claim her life as his own. Somewhere in the distance, the first crows took flight, their wings slicing the pale sky, and for a fleeting moment, Clara dared to believe she might survive this hellish morning. By the jagged cliffs of Dead Man's Pass, the desert heat pressed down relentlessly, turning every breath into a struggle. Clara stumbled across the red dust, ropes cutting into her wrists with every frantic step. The cowboy's horse snorted, pawing the ground impatiently, hooves kicking up clouds of powdery sand. He leaned close to her, his rough voice low and sinister. "You thought you could run? Ain't nowhere safe out here for someone like you." The words slithered through the scorching air, meant to crush her spirit. Clara's heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and desperate hope. She could see the canyon walls rising like molten gold under the sun, jagged edges creating shadows that twisted with the wind. And then she caught sight of him, the warrior. He emerged from the shadows of the rocks, moving with fluid grace that made the air itself seem to part around him. Shirtless, his bronzed skin glistened with sweat, muscles taut and coiled like springs ready to snap. Long black hair whipped across his face in the wind, and the turquoise, bone, and silver jewelry that adorned his chest and arms shimmered in the harsh sunlight. His dark eyes were locked on the cowboy, steady and unwavering, radiating a quiet but deadly authority. The cowboy laughed, a low, cruel sound, confident in his supposed dominance. But the warrior's presence was like a storm rolling in across the desert, inescapable, unyielding, and dangerous. Clara's gaze flickered between them, her chest heaving, mind racing. Somewhere deep in her, a spark of hope ignited. For the first time since her capture, she believed she might survive this encounter. Without a word, the warrior advanced, each step deliberate, boots barely scuffing the red dust. The cowboy reached for his gun, but the warrior was faster, moving with the precision of a predator who had hunted every inch of these plains. Dust swirled around them, sunlight bouncing off jagged rocks, illuminating the tension in every line of their bodies. Clara pressed herself against a boulder, heart hammering so violently it threatened to burst from her chest. She could feel the hillense, heat radiating off the cowboy and the warrior, the desert itself seeming to hold its breath, suspended in the quiet before the storm. The cowboy's hand hovered over his revolver, but the warrior's gaze never wavered, calm yet predatory. Every second stretched into eternity, every tiny shift in stance a potential pivot between life and death. "Step away from her," the warrior said, voice low but sharp, like a whip snapping through the air. The words carried a weight that made even the sun-baked desert feel colder, sharper. The cowboy sneered, stepping closer, but the warrior mirrored him, chest forward, stance grounded, ready for anything. Sand shifted under their boots as the tension coiled tighter. Clara's fingers brushed against the dusty ground, gripping small stones as if the earth itself might lend her strength. The wind whistled across the canyon, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and sweat. Her body trembled, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that this stranger, the warrior, was risking everything for her. Then, in an instant, the cowboy made his move. He lunged, hand on his gun, eyes wild with anger. The warrior reacted like lightning, pivoting with lethal precision, blocking the cowboy's arm with his own, sending a shockwave of force through the desert air. Dust rose around them in a golden cloud, sunlight glinting off the warrior's jewelry, each motion graceful, deliberate, and deadly. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The cowboy stumbled back, surprise flickering across his face. The warrior's chest heaved, but his focus never wavered. Every fiber of his body radiated power and control, a living shield between Clara and death. She realized then that this man would not yield, would not falter. His life was now bound to hers, his skill and courage a promise of protection in this wild, merciless land. The canyon seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the confrontation. The wind kicked up sand, whipping Clara's hair across her face, the scent of sweat and gunpowder filling her nostrils. The cowboy's arrogance faltered as he faced the unshakable resolve of the warrior. Every second that passed brought her closer to freedom, every heartbeat a silent testament to the warrior's unyielding promise. Clara finally allowed herself a tremulous breath, hope flickering in her stormy eyes. She didn't know who this man was, didn't yet know the strength behind those dark eyes, but instinct told her he was her only chance. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing Dead Man's Pass in a cruel golden light, she understood one undeniable truth: she was not alone, and someone was willing to lay down his life to save hers. The desert sun climbed higher, turning the jagged canyon walls to molten gold. Every grain of red sand seemed to hold the heat of 1,000 suns, baking Clara's arms and face as she crouched behind a jagged boulder, her wrists raw from the kivi, unforgiving ropes. Her heart thundered in her chest, a relentless drum of fear and anticipation, each beat echoing the perils surrounding her. The cowboy, still towering over her with menacing confidence, adjusted his hat and spat into the dust. His boots shifted in the sand, the jingling of spurs a cruel reminder of the danger she faced. The warrior stood firm between them, chest bare, bronzed muscles glistening with sweat, long black hair tangled and wild, shimmering tribal jewelry catching the sunlight with every subtle movement. He radiated power and calm simultaneously, a storm contained in human form. His dark eyes never left the cowboy, unwavering, assessing, calculating. Clara's gaze flicked from the cowboy to the warrior and back, trapped in a liminal space of terror and hope. The cowboy's hand hovered over the grip of his revolver, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He was a predator used to control, to domination, to bending others to his will, yet here, in the heart of the desert, faced with a man who moved with the confidence of the land itself, he hesitated. Dust rose in lazy spirals around their boots, suspended in the tense stillness, and the wind carried the scent of sage, earth, and sweat. Clara felt every second stretch, elongated by fear, each heartbeat echoing in her ears. She pressed herself lower against the boulder, sand scraping her cheek, and watched the silent duel of wills unfold before her. The warrior shifted slightly, foot poised, shoulders squared, his stance unyielding. Every muscle in his body suggested coiled strength ready to strike in an instant, yet he did not move until the moment demanded it. He was a living barrier, a promise of protection, and Clara felt, for the first time, a flicker of genuine hope. The cowboy's lips twisted into a sneer, but it lacked its usual certainty. "Step aside and maybe I'll let her walk," he spat, voice thick with disdain. The warrior's jaw tightened, eyes darkening with lethal intent. He did not flinch, did not answer immediately, letting the threat hang in the air like a loaded gun. The canyon itself seemed to hum with tension, the sun casting long, sharp shadows across the cracked ground. Time stretched. Each movement, each twitch was magnified in the oppressive heat. Clara's stomach churned as she sensed the inevitability of violence. She could feel the cowboy's gaze burning into her, attempting to instill fear, but it faltered beneath the warrior's unbroken stare. The wind stirred, lifting dust and sand, whispering through the canyon like the voice of fate itself, carrying with it the sense that a choice would be made in this moment, life or death. Suddenly, the cowboy shifted, his hand darting toward his gun. In that instant, the warrior moved, coiled and precise. Dust exploded around his boots as he stepped forward, a wall of motion that blocked Clara's captor. His bronze chest gleamed, hair whipping around his face, jewelry clinking like war bells. His eyes, dark and unyielding, locked onto the cowboy with the intensity of a predator who has claimed the territory of survival as his own. Clara gasped softly, her fingers clutching the edges of the boulder, watching the dance of menace and resolve unfold. She could see the muscles flex and tighten, the warrior's movements fluid and deliberate, each step and stance calculated to protect her. Every inch the cowboy advanced, every threat he muttered, was met with equal force, silent and unstoppable. The wind kicked up again, whipping sand into Clara's eyes and drying the sweat on her skin. She blinked rapidly, then peeked over the boulder, taking in the tableau. The cowboy, wild-eyed and dangerous, facing the unyielding, shirtless warrior, both framed by the towering red cliffs. She felt a strange mixture of terror and awe. Somewhere, deep in her chest, a flicker of courage ignited. She understood now that this man, this warrior, would not allow harm to come to her, not today, not while he drew breath. The sun blazed overhead, the desert held its breath, and in that suspended moment, Clara realized a terrifying truth. Her life now rested entirely in the hands of a stranger whose power, skill, and determination could either save her or end her world in an instant. The sun hung high over Dead Man's Pass, turning every stone and ridge into molten gold. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, catching the light and coating Clara's arms and face with a gritty film. Her wrists burned, wrists chafed raw by the ropes, and every nerve in her body screamed with tension. She pressed herself against the rough surface of the boulder, eyes wide, heart hammering like a drum. The cowboy's laughter had turned frantic, edged with panic, as he realized the warrior standing between them was not just a man. He was an unstoppable force of nature. The warrior moved with a predator's precision. Shirtless, his bronzed skin glistened with sweat, each muscle taut and coiled, ready to strike. Long black hair whipped across his face, tribal jewelry turquoise, bone and silver clinking softly with his every motion. Dust rose around his feet in golden clouds, kicked up by the power of his steps, sunlight catching each speck like sparks of fire. Clara could barely breathe as she watched him pivot, fists raised, eyes locked on the cowboy with icy intensity. Cowboy lunged first, gun flashing in the sunlight. The warrior sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the cowboy's wrist mid-motion and twisting, sending the weapon spinning across the dirt. The clang of metal against stone echoed through the canyon, a harsh punctuation to the tension already crackling in the air. The cowboy roared in frustration, teeth bared, swinging a punch that would have felled any ordinary man. But the warrior was no ordinary man. His body flowed like water and stone combined, blocking, dodging, countering, every movement precise and lethal. Clara bit her lip, wincing as fists and boots collided, dust erupting around the combatants. She could see every ripple of the warrior's muscles, every flex and coil as he absorbed attacks and struck back with breathtaking speed. His movements were a dance of survival and protection, each strike measured, each counter deliberate. The cowboy stumbled, his confidence crumbling under the relentless force of skill and power. The warrior's eyes flicked toward Clara for a brief instant, a silent assurance. "You are safe, I will not fail." She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mix of awe and relief, as if the desert itself had granted her a guardian in human form. The cowboy roared again, swinging wildly, but his blows met only air and the unyielding defense of the warrior. Dust and sweat mingled in the golden sunlight, swirling like a storm contained within the canyon walls. Suddenly, the cowboy grabbed a jagged rock, swinging it toward the warrior's head. Time seemed to slow. The warrior's reflexes were instinctive. Caught the rock with one hand, twisting the cowboy's arm behind him in a controlled, almost effortless motion. A grunt of pain escaped the cowboy as he fell to one knee, and the warrior's free hand hovered near his chest, ready to strike again if needed. Clara exhaled shakily, heart pounding, but the fight was not yet over. The cowboy scrambled, fury in his eyes, desperation fueling every move. He lunged, and the warrior met him with the force of a wall of stone. Each punch and counter sent small clouds of dust spiraling into the air, golden motes dancing in the sunlight. The clang of boots against rock, the grunt of exertion, the crackle of tension, it all blended into a symphony of survival. Then, with a final fluid motion, the warrior knocked the cowboy off balance, sending him sprawling into the dust. His chest heaved with exertion, but his gaze never left Clara. She realized, with a shiver, that this man's strength was not just in his body but in his unwavering resolve to protect her. The cowboy groaned, defeated yet alive, and the warrior's stance relaxed just slightly, the tension in the air easing by the tiniest fraction. Clara moved forward, unthinking, drawn by a mixture of gratitude and awe. Her dusty hands reached toward the warrior, and for the first time since the morning began, she felt a fragile hope. She might survive this hellish desert encounter, thanks to the man who had fought with every ounce of skill and courage to keep her alive. The canyon, silent once more, seemed to pulse with the aftermath of violence. Dust settled, sunlight glinted off the warrior's jewelry, and Clara realized that her life and perhaps her heart now rested in the hands of a man willing to risk everything to ensure she survived. The desert seemed to exhale, a brief pause in the relentless heat as the cowboy groaned in defeat, sprawled across the red dust of Dead Man's Pass. The warrior stood over him, chest heaving, bronzed muscles glistening with sweat, long black hair tangled in wild, tribal jewelry glinting with every subtle movement. His dark eyes never left the defeated cowboy, scanning for any sudden motion, any hidden threat. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the canyon walls into molten gold, shadows stretching like silent witnesses to the confrontation. Clara's knees shook as she stepped cautiously from behind the boulder. Every muscle in her body ached, wrists raw and burning from the ropes, heart still pounding with adrenaline. Her stormy eyes flicked between the warrior and the defeated cowboy. Relief mingled with awe, a fragile hope threading through her exhaustion. She had survived against all odds, and the man who had saved her, a stranger whose name she didn't yet know, stood between her and danger like a living shield. The warrior's gaze finally shifted to her, dark eyes softening for the briefest instant. He gestured for her to come closer, his movements precise, careful, as though even a small misstep could unravel the fragile thread of safety. Clara approached slowly, the dust crunching under her worn boots, every step weighted with caution and a dawning sense of gratitude. "You're safe now," he said quietly, voice low and steady, carrying the authority of someone who had faced death countless times and emerged unbroken. Clara nodded, unable to find words at first, her throat tight with emotion. She could feel the strength radiating from him, not just in his body but in the unyielding resolve that had guided every movement, every strike, every calculated defense. The cowboy groaned, rolling to his side, his gaze flicking nervously between Clara and the warrior. He was beaten, humiliated, yet stubborn enough to survive, and the warrior's eyes remained locked on him, unflinching, a silent warning that any further threat would be met with unrelenting force. Clara realized that the fight was over, but the danger of the world beyond these canyon walls still lingered. Subtle and patient, the warrior knelt briefly to examine the ropes around Clara's wrists. His hands, rough from years of survival and combat, moved deftly, slicing through the fibers with a sharp knife he carried at his belt. The ropes fell away, and Clara rubbed her raw skin, tears pricking her eyes from the sting. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind stirring through the canyon. He only nodded, eyes still scanning the horizon, alert. Protective, Clara stood unsteadily, brushing dust from her clothes. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself to breathe freely, feeling the scorching heat of the desert not as a threat, but as a backdrop to her newfound hope. The warrior's presence was a fortress, a living shield that had turned desperation into survival. She could sense it in every line of his body, in the taut strength of his arms, in the measured calm of his gaze. The cowboy, finally realizing he had no leverage left, pushed himself up, groaning, glancing around with a mixture of fear and fury. He spat into the dust and muttered a curse, then slowly retreated toward his horse, eyes never leaving the warrior. The man's movements were cautious now, wary of the force that had bested him so decisively. Clara let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her body as the immediate threat receded. The warrior turned fully toward her, expression softening further, though his vigilance never waned. He extended a hand, calloused but steady, and Clara took it without hesitation. The contact was grounding, a silent reassurance that she was no longer alone in the desert, no longer at the mercy of cruel hands. As they moved away from the canyon floor, the wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, filling Clara's lungs with the sharp, clean air of survival. The red dust settled behind them, the canyon walls bathed in molten sunlight, silent witnesses to a battle fought and a life spared. Clara glanced at the warrior, heart swelling with gratitude and awe. He did not speak, but his presence said everything. She was protected, and in this unforgiving land, she had found a guardian willing to risk everything for her life. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a wild, untamed landscape of danger and possibility. Clara walked beside the warrior, each step lighter than the last, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to hope. In the heart of the Old West, amidst jagged rocks and scorching sun, she had survived, and she owed her life to the man who had fought with unmatched skill, courage, and honor to save her. The desert sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the jagged canyon walls. Clara's legs ached and her chest heaved with exhaustion, but she walked steadily now, each step lighter than the last. The ropes that had bound her wrists were gone, her fear tempered by the presence of the warrior who had saved her life. He moved beside her with silent assurance, every step measured, muscles coiled yet relaxed, a living symbol of strength and protection. The defeated cowboy had vanished beyond the canyon's edge, his horse kicking up small clouds of red dust as he fled toward the distant plains. Clara stole a glance at him, a flicker of relief in her stormy eyes. She had survived, and the man who had saved her, bronzed, muscular, shirtless, long black hair, wild and tribal jewelry glinting in the sunlight, was still at her side. The desert seemed to shift around them, wind lifting dust into golden spirals, carrying with it the scent of sage and freedom. Clara finally found her voice, trembling but firm. Who are you?" she asked, glancing at him. His dark eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed a faint hint of a smile to touch his bronzed lips. He didn't speak immediately, letting the desert's silence answer for him. Then, in a voice low and steady, he said, "Call me Dakota. I protect those who cannot protect themselves." The weight of his words settled over her like a shield. Clara's stormy eyes met his, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a growing sense of connection. She had been lost, trapped by fear and cruelty. Yet this man Takoda had become the guardian of her life, a force of courage and honor she could not ignore. She took a tentative step closer, brushing dust from her skirts, and felt the reassuring presence of someone willing to risk everything for her survival. The canyon stretched endlessly before them, a maze of jagged rocks and red dust that reflected the dying sunlight. Clara felt the desert's harsh beauty for the first time without fear. Each rock, each dust spiral, each whispering gust of wind now seemed alive, a witness to her escape, a monument to her survival. The warrior's muscles flexed as he scanned the horizon, vigilant, ready for any further threat. Yet Clara sensed something more, a promise unspoken but palpable. She was safe, and she was not alone. As they walked together, the tension in Clara's body began to ease. Her arms no longer trembled uncontrollably. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. The desert wind tousled her hair, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, grounding her in a reality she hadn't dared hope for. Hours ago, Takoda moved silently beside her, bronze skin gleaming, hair flowing, tribal jewelry clinking softly with each step. Every motion was a rhythm of protection, every glance a reassurance. She had survived, and he would not let danger touch her again. Finally, as the canyon opened to rolling plains, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in molten gold and deep crimson. Clara paused, looking out across the vast expanse, and realized how far she had come from terror and capture to safety and freedom. The desert no longer seemed cruel and merciless. It was a land of survival, of guardianship, and perhaps new beginnings. Takoda's eyes met hers, unwavering and solemn. "You're safe now," he said again, a simple truth that carried the weight of his courage. Clara's lips curved into a faint smile, the first genuine one of the day. She knew she had been given more than life, she had been given a chance. And someone who would stand with her against the world's cruelty. As they walked into the horizon together, dust kicking up around their boots, the red canyon walls fading behind them, Clara felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of hope. The sun dipped below the distant mountains, bathing them in a golden light that seemed to bless their escape. In the heart of the Old West, amidst danger and violence, she had found life and perhaps a kindred spirit in the warrior who had risked everything to save her. The desert wind carried the promise of tomorrow, of freedom, and of a bond forged in courage, sweat, and the red dust of survival. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Clara understood a truth she would carry forever. Sometimes in the harshest places, salvation arrives in the form of someone willing to lay down their life so you may live.